After a lifetime of researching the dynamic and enigmatic world of light entertainment, I've decided to ditch my notebook and meet the people who inspire me. What makes them the people they are? How do they feel about the show business landscape in which they find themselves? And in a world where anyone can be a star, is there still a need for performers who have universal appeal? Come with me on a journey of discovery as I get a unique insight into Britain's favourite stars with a little help from my glamorous assistants. Yeah, well, I say glamorous, more like hazardous. And of course, we'll have a bit of fun along the way.
Indie veterans Dodgy exploded onto the British music scene in 1993 with their self-titled debut album. Yet it was their 1995 follow-up record, Three-Piece Suite, which helped to define the 90s with timeless hits including Good Enough and Staying Out for the Summer. I caught up with the band on the Isle of Wight leg of their nationwide tour to talk music, inspirations and life on the road. Ladies and gentlemen, Matthew Priest of Dodgy.
Right, so let's go back to the very beginning. Am I right in thinking that the band grew out of a duo between yourself and Nigel? How did this provide the future band with a grounding which eventually grew into the band we know today?
Right. Well, I was in a band because I was in a place called Bromsgrove, which is in the outskirts of Birmingham, sort of like the suburbs of Birmingham, and there weren't many drummers in that place, and so I was young, and I was like 15, 14, and I was one of the only drummers in that town that could into the kind of music that they're into, which is at that time was U2 and the Cult and Sex Pistols and stuff, and so I got into playing in bands very, very early, and then and I was always playing with guys that were older than me, and then the band I was in developed, and the singer left, and then we advertised for a new singer, and I put the advert into the paper saying the best band in the world requires the best singer in the world, and Nigel responded, and he turned up, and he looked at the time. I don't know if you know a singer called Billy Idol. He looked a bit like Billy Idol. He had he had white hair, leather. He looked ace, and Nigel turned up. And I was like dead nervous because I was like 16, but we bonded straight away because we both loved a band called The. I don't know if you know a band called The. In the 80s, they had this amazing album called Infected, and they were kind of indie, kind of cool band. Not everyone knew them, and me and him. But he went, "You know The?" And I went, "You know The?" Wow! So we bonded over that band, and then me and him kind of bonded more and more, and then the guys who were in our band, we sort of weren't care about that. And me and Nigel had this bond, and then Nigel he had a really good job at Austin Rover working in cars in Birmingham. Everyone worked in Austin Rover. It was a massive factory. It was like, at its peak, there were 50,000 people working at Austin Rover. But around my time, it was about 10,000 people. Nigel worked at Austin Rover, and he had a fiancée, he had a house, he had a car. And then he called me up one day, and this was before mobile phones or the internet, where they'd call you up on the house phone. And I picked up the house phone, and I was 17, and I was kind of doing my A-levels. And Nigel went, "We're going down to London." And I'm like, but you've got a girlfriend and you've got a... I mean, no, if we're going to do this, we're going to make it. And I was like, shit. Oh, okay. Put down the phone, and then I had to convince my mum that we had to go down to London. And she wasn't happy about it. It took 2-3 months to convince my mum, because she was like, "But you could do this and you could do that," and I was like, "Yeah, but I really want to go down to, and I really want to make it." And I wore her down, and then me and Nigel moved down to London, and we essentially started the whole thing that eventually ended up as Dodgy. So that was the thing. But because Nigel made such a sacrifice and I made a sacrifice, it was like, this isn't just a little thing, a little band that we're just going to try out. It was like, we are going to make this happen, you know what I mean? And we did, you know. Good story, happy story.
And throughout history, musicians and artists have taken inspiration to do what they do from the sort of socio-economics of their childhood.
Wow.
What was it about growing up in the 80s which made you feel so empowered to make music?
Oh, mate, mate, what a question. Read that again to me, because that's an amazing question. Amazing question. Go on.
From the socio-economics of your childhood, what was it about growing up in the 80s which made you feel so empowered to make music?
Well, in the 80s, when I was 13 in 1983, and it was like that's the time when I was really starting getting to music, 12, 11, and I was lucky because my dad and my brother, older brother, were really into music as well. But if you think about it, it was only 16 years since 1969, 15 years since 1960, and it wasn't that long ago, and the 80s was so quick. Everything happened really quick. We had punk in the 70s really quickly, and then we had post-punk, Elvis Costello and Blondie and the Police, and then with the 80s and all this new technology was coming in, and all these synth pop bands like Human League and Soft Cell, who I loved. But back then, music was something. Pop stars were something to aspire to. They were amazing. You know, you wanted to be in a pop. Nowadays, you want to go and work in IT, or you want to be a gamer or something. But back then, you had bands like the Clash and the Jam. The Jam was so important to so many kids from working class, middle class backgrounds. The Jam were really important. The Clash were really important. It was like you want to do it. It was where you do, and also because it's very, very hard for a lot of kids to understand now. There's an author, I can't remember his name, and he said, "What would it be like if the internet was turned off right now? The internet was turned off. What would it be like right now?" And he said 1995, because pre-1995 we had mobile phones that were crap. We didn't have the internet, and music was really important to people. It was really important. If you got some pocket money, you'd go down the record shop. On every single high street, there'd be an Our Price, or there'd be a Virgin, or there'd be a Tower record. There'd be a record shop, and you would go and buy a record. That's what you do with your pocket money. Nowadays, you don't do that. Kids don't do that. But music meant a lot. It meant a lot to kids back then, and to me, the whole idea, the Beatles, just meaning something. Doing something that's, wow, we can do that. I don't think I answered your question. Was phenomenal, and I don't think I answered it as well as your question was, but I think I did quite well.
And that was obviously 80s, very important to you, but the 90s really was when Dodgy took off, and at that time it felt music had just sort of rediscovered the concept of freedom, like what the 60s had revelled in. How would you sum up the 90s as a decade?
Well, it's very interesting. There was a lot of money around in the 90s. There was a lot of positivity around. And because record companies had a lot of money, because they had this brilliant period in the 80s where everyone had a vinyl album of, say, Dire Straits or David Bowie, and then they'd go out and buy the CD of that album, so they get double the amount. So there's loads of money sloshing around in the music industry, and so that's one factor. Lots of money in the music industry, and they were prepared to spend it. Second factor, 2, is that Radio 1, they had DJs like, you may not know this, but they had DJs like Simon Bates, Dave Lee Travis, and it was like old. And the whole remit of Radio 1, the whole thing is, because it's a public broadcasting station, is that they have to broadcast, Radio 1 has to broadcast to 16 to 25-year-olds. Yet all the DJs were like over 50, and they were boring and they were crap. And so they got this new head of Radio 1 in called Matthew Bannister, who completely sacked everyone, sacked all these people, and got people like Chris Evans, Zoe Ball, and changed it. But with these new DJs, he wanted a sound of Radio 1, the new sound, to kind of make it, you know. So we've got the new DJs, what's the sound of Radio 1? And luckily for him, Britpop and Oasis and Blur and the Charlatans and Dodgy and all these bands were coming through. And so all these bands would get on the playlist. And that's the thing that a lot of people don't understand, is that these bands were everywhere. You'd hear them. You'd hear Dodgy. You'd hear Oasis. You'd hear Blur on the radio. And it was like, wow. And it was a real wow. And for a while, guitar bands or bands that had something to say, cool bands with good lyrics, was pop music. It was pop music. It wasn't crap that we're getting at the moment. It was pop. We had Pulp and Dodgy and Supergrass and Blur and Away in the top 10. And it was like, that was pop music, and it was like amazing. And I think the two factors, because there was a lot of money in the music industry, and Radio 1 wanted to champion a new sound. But also, there were a lot of great bands around. Great bands, really good bands around. So that combination of all those things just resulted in this thing in the mid-90s of this fantastic sound, you know.
And your self-titled debut album was released in '93 and was produced by the Lightning Seeds' Ian Brody. How integral do you think he was to that record's success?
Well, it wasn't really a success, that album. It wasn't really a success. We loved the sound of the Lightning Seeds because they had a song called Life of Riley and Sense, and you know that, yeah, really good. And also he produced Echo and the Boiling Men, he produced the Icicle Works, and he was a real sound. And he was kind of suggested to us by the record company as a safe pair of hands. And you know what? As a band, we look back upon that album and we're not happy with it because he overproduced it. There was too much. He didn't allow us to be ourselves. But the second album, where we had Hugh Jones, that's where he allowed us to be ourselves, you know. But Ian Brody, he's an amazing producer and he's an amazing songwriter. And I went on to play in the Lightning Seeds for about 2 or 3 years, and I played in that band as well. And the first ever gig, listen to this, the first ever gig I did for the Lightning Seeds was, do you remember Hillsborough, where this horrible thing, 96 people died? There was a gig at Anfield in Liverpool where there was the Manic Street Preachers, Beautiful South, Lightning Seeds all played, Dodgy played. And that was my first ever gig with the Lightning Seeds. And because Manic Street Preachers and Beautiful South said, this is too much of an important gig, we won't headline. The Lightning Seeds have to headline because A, they're from Liverpool, and B, they have the footy song, It's Coming Home, It's Coming. So the Lightning Seeds headlined that gig, and that was my first gig with the Lightning Seeds. And I was shitting myself. And it was like in front of 55,000 Scousers. But you know what was lovely? Is that Manic Street Preachers, Nicky and James, who I met along the way, I'd always say hello and meet them. And they're big socialists, big people, they believe in people. And they said, and I told them, I said, this is my first gig, and I'm shitting myself. And they went, oh, really? Oh, because they're Welsh, bad Welsh accent. bad Welsh accent. And they said, and they went, oh, okay. And they stood at the side of the stage, and I played the drums, and every time I looked across, they were like that. Come on, man. And they supported me, sort of in spirit. And I looked across. Every time I looked across, they were there going, come on, man. And I'll never forget that the two guys in the Manic Street Preachers stood at the side of the stage and were like, you can do it, man. And I was like, wow. Because it was such an emotional day. You know, it's all about people that died, but it was all about people coming together. You know what's wonderful? Is that they finally got justice. Finally got justice. Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned your follow-up album there, Three Piece Suite. That helped to define a 90s generation. Tell us a little bit about the development process that went into creating such an iconic album. Especially, as like you say, after the first album, you weren't overly happy.
Yeah. Well, the second album that we did was an album called Homegrown, where it was a lot easier to do, and we'd had all the songs written. The third album, Three Piece Suite, by that point, Nigel, our singer, had a kid. So we had to do the album quite close to where he lived. So we did an album in a place called, what was it called? It was called... There's a studio, and it's where they did Sandinista by The Clash, and they did Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen, and it was a classic studio that we did. And it was one of the things, we had quite a few songs written, but Nigel was, because Nigel's kind of the main creative source in the band, he was on fire. He was on fire. He had loads of things going. And we had this guy, Hugh Jones, who we'd worked with on Homegrown. He knew the band, we knew him. And we were on fire. And I remember things where we'd be in the studio and Nigel was like doing a song that we called the Elton John song. And it was like, because he was a bit like Elton John. And Hugh Jones would be like, right, Math, there's the lyric sheet. Right, what the lyrics? Do we have all the lyrics? Write the lyrics, Math. Nigel. And it was all fast working. And it was all... We were on fire. He was on fire. We had lots of songs. We had Good Enough, In a Room. The record company were really behind us. The head of the record company was like... He said, right, you're our priority band. We're going to make a success out of you. And we're like, wow, great. So it was, and he heard, I remember he heard Good Enough, which is our big hit. And he heard that for the first time and he went, this is great. And he's American. And he went, this is great. He goes, the video has got to be in a hot country. And we're like, yeah. Got to be like somewhere like India or Jamaica. And we're like, yeah. Because they wanted to spend money. Again, what I said earlier, they had money and they wanted to spend. So we were on fire. Everything was good.
So why do you think Good Enough is so fondly remembered and why it was such a huge hit?
Because it repeats the chorus. Because it repeats it. Good enough for you. Good enough. Good. It repeats it. It's a classic pop song. It repeats it.
Catchy.
And also it's happy. Yeah, it's happy. And it's simple. It's simple. And it has a great vibe to it, and people just love it because it repeats and it's simple and people love it and it makes people feel good. And we never would have guessed how big that song would have been because it's massive. That song is like, it's a great story. Sorry, I'm going to carry on here, but there's a great story where I went to hire a car from in King's Cross, where I lived in London, and I walked into the car hire place, and they had a garage at the back, and they were playing Capital Radio in London was like a big poppy station, and they played Good Enough as I walked in, and loads of the engineers at the back who were working the cars, hey, good enough, and they were singing along to it. And I went, oh, that's quite cool. I quite like that. Hired the car. The next week, I bought it back 5 days later. And I bought it back and handed the keys in. And Good Enough was playing again. I went, whoa. And that's one of those moments where you go, shit, that song is really... It wasn't Radio 1, it was Capital, which is pop. And they were playing it all the time. And you go, okay, this is massive, this song. People like it, and it's working, and it's out of our hands. You know what I mean? We did it, but it's out of our hands now, you know.
Another huge anthem, Staying Out for the Summer. What's the story behind that song?
Nigel, as I said, he worked in Austin Rover, which was this big, massive car factory in Birmingham. And he worked on the... He worked himself up, and he was on the production line. You know, the cars come in, do this, and the cars go through, and he said, you know, the production on the cars, and they work, and they gradually go through, and you have to do the thing to it, and it goes through. And some of the old fellas on the production line would go, don't get out, just get out. If you've got any kind of talent, get out. You don't want to be in this, just get out. And it was Nigel looking at his life about working in a factory and going, these guys are telling me that I've got to get out. And they were really generous. These old guys were being generous to him, going, as in, get the fuck out of here, mate. If you're a singer in a band, get out, man. Don't be in it, because it'll grab you and it'll suck you in, and before you know it, you've been here 15 years and you're on the production line doing what you do. And I think it was Nigel saying, got to get out of here, you know, and him kind of realising that it's not the world for him. The world, what he wanted to do was being in a band, you know.
So we're here tonight at Medina Theatre on the Isle of Wight, where you're performing. What's still the thrill of performing for you?
Meeting someone like this boy. The thrill is... It's guaranteed that every gig that you do, there is always someone that's never seen you before. A lot of times it's people who've seen you before, but there's always someone that's never seen you before. And if I'm lucky, they'll come up and they'll talk to me after the gig, and they'll go, never seen you before, and you're amazing. Oh my God, I can't believe I've never seen you before. And you made that connection. And when a gig goes well, you make a connection with the audience, and it's funny. Man, it can be so funny. And there's a transference of humour and energy that you can't replicate anywhere. You don't get that buzz where I can take the piss, I can have a laugh, I can say something, I can do a song and people clap, and they're like, oh, I love that. And that transference of energy is such a massive thing, you know. So, you know, you don't get that by going to the shop and buying a pint of milk. You know what I mean? It's a great thing, you know.
And what's next for Dodgy?
Well, we're going to have a bit of time off. The three guys, Nigel and Miller, they're going to go to an acoustic tour throughout October, November. And I'm going to go and play with a band called the Icicle Works from Liverpool. Play drums for them. And then we're just going to have some time off because we've been so busy. Because we split up, or Nigel left, and then we've actually been, and then for 10 years, we've actually been together longer this time we were the first time. And we don't want to be playing crap gigs anymore. We don't. We want to just take a bit of time off and raise our fee a little bit, and if people want to book us, they'll book us, and then just take a bit of time away, you know. And it's because I work with kids with emotional behavioural difficulties. I work with people like yourself, and I'm loving that. I'm loving teaching, you know. So we'll see. We'll see what happens next year.
Great. Well, thanks very much. That's fantastic.
A big thank you to our guest for being the subject of another Beyond the Title interview. If you like this, why not browse the website and see if there's anything else that takes your fancy. Don't forget to like our Facebook page to receive updates of forthcoming interviews and to see more information about me and what I do. Thanks again, and hopefully see you next time for another Beyond the Title interview.